We often refer to ourselves as leaders in test-based nutrition. And that's a big claim to make, but it's one that I believe that we can actually provide evidence for. And in fact, we're obliged to. As the famous physicist Carl Sagan said, anybody who makes an exceptional claim needs to be able to provide exceptional evidence. And I feel like that's something that we can do quite easily, almost off the shelf. We have the world's largest database when it comes to omega-3 status. We partner with the Vitas labs in Norway, who independently and objectively analyze all those samples that come in from all around the world. But actually, I'm going to come back to that in a moment, because that's our in-house evidence. That's something that we're in possession of. I think really to qualify ourselves as leaders within this field, we have to look at what influences the choices we make, what influences the action that we take, because action is always the most important part. So we look at the evidence base, we look at the research, we look at the clinical, we look at the academic research around certain nutritional components, and we use that to inform our decision making. But there's more to it than that as well. And in fact, a big part of this is about addressing real world issues. And that can sound quite dramatic. And in fact, this term of providing solutions has become something of a cliche within the nutrition industry. And so I want to really steer away from that idea. But what I do want to focus on is the same type of principle. In order for you to lead the way, in order for us to be leaders in test-based nutrition, we have to position ourselves at the very front. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to be a pathfinder, if you're going to forge the path, then you have to expect to clear the path. You have to move things out the way. And that's been a big part of our trajectory to date, is eliminating the noise, getting through the nonsense, the misinformation, and getting to the heart of what really matters. When we consider something like omega-3, and we know that we have balance oil, which is the world's only proven effective omega-3 supplement. When you start to look at the need around that essential nutrient and the conversation at large within the research literature, within those clinical spaces that are looking at the role it plays with managing our health, with reducing our risk of developing non-communicable diseases. When you look at the amount, the sheer volume of research in that area, it's clear to see that there are certain aspects that reach a consensus, where there is an agreement. And most of that is derived around the preventative component, the reduction of risk. And then there's a second phase, which looks at when somebody has dealt with a poor health circumstance, how correcting that status, that fundamental nutrition status, ensuring you have enough omega-3, well, what part that plays in recovering, in restoration, in rehabilitation, in somebody gaining their health back. All of this is really provocative. It's powerful. It really resonates with people at a deep level, because most of us will either have experienced some type of illness or certainly have people around us who've dealt with some type of serious illness. I like to think that most people recognize what's going on in the world, understand the risk, and actually want to prevent that from happening. In order to do that, you have to be able to objectively understand your status. You have to be able to measure. You have to see where you're at. Where are you beginning from? And there is a whole industry at large, which actually occupies a lot of space online, that is offering all manner of tests. Everything from your fundamental DNA to a specific nutritional component. Some tests are great. Some tests are awful. Some tests cost a lot of money, and some are really, really cheap. And what I will say is that a good test is never cheap, and a cheap test is never good. You have to forge your way through the middle. You have to have reliable, valid, repeatable test indicators and markers that can provide somebody with a meaningful insight to what it is they intend to measure. So again, back to this notion, well, what makes us leaders within that space? Well, the first part is that we draw on all our evidence to understand what's the best test method. Not how cheaply we can make it happen, but how most effectively we can make it happen. And also when it comes to the science part, the more technical aspect, how accurate can we be? Because the key thing is to be able to empower people with information that actually gives them a reliable insight to whatever that status is. So to lead the way is to have standards. It's to have a marker in place that says that we're not prepared to compromise because we do understand the research in the area. We do understand the science, and that understanding leads to standards. So we make sure that what we do is done the best possible way. It needs to be reliable because what we're dealing with is enabling you to have a greater insight towards yourself so that you can be empowered to do something positive about it. Ideally, that's preventative. The best situation is that we're dealing with somebody who has no problems. And what they want to do is make sure that they don't develop any problems either. But in other instances, we recognize and we take it really, really serious as our duty of care is that when a person is dealing with poor health, for whatever reason, they need a reliable marker of something that they can influence and change. So if we go back to that omega-3, if we go back to the test, the fatty acid profile test, we can measure exactly what's there and then we can do something about it. Then we go back to our database. That notion of all that test information coming through. We can tell you, we can tell everybody in the world, and in fact, that's what we're exactly doing, the status of the world when it comes to omega-3. And realize that the World Health Organization itself reported an estimated 6.3 billion people on the planet living with an omega-3 deficiency, and this is an essential nutrient. So then we get back to that provocative language of trying to address problems, of trying to provide solutions. And it has become a cliche, but to lead the field in that way is to take it really, really seriously. And not just point at the problem, but actually guide people towards something that can make a difference, a meaningful difference that can measurably change their health status and therefore their health expectations and outcomes. Also, in order to be a leader in this field, we can't just listen to ourselves. The first rule of science is to eliminate your subjectivity. You have to be objective. And so we engage internationally with a scientific advisory group. We have specialists from all over the world, leaders in the field, who are contributing towards the peer-reviewed research on an annual basis, who have the highest possible standards in their academic output, who we engage with on a weekly, monthly basis to gain insights, for them to sense check the decisions we intend to make, the actions we plan to take when it comes to development of a product or the development of a new test. And we critically analyze our decision making, the choices, our thinking. Why do we think this way? And is it in line with that research base? Can we verify it? Can we stand behind it and make sure that it lives up to our standards? So everything we put in place, standards drive the cause. When we brought out the vitamin D test, it was all about making sure we had a reliable, accurate, repeatable marker so that you can see what's really going on and then take action to correct or maintain the situation. When we brought forward the HbA1c test, the blood sugar analysis, again, standards were the first port of call. Because the reality is, most health boards around the world are dealing with such volume of numbers on these types of tests that actually there is an array of standards. That's not controversial, it's not sensational to say, it's just simply true. There is an array of standards. And what we wanted to provide the world with, as leaders in this space, was one reliable, really well-controlled test method that could give people a really well-informed insight to their status so that they could be empowered to do something about it. We provided information and guidance in order for people to change and modify their behavior, their lifestyle, the choices they make about what they do, what they consume, everything across the board to the highest possible standard. We eliminate on the process of those standards. We make choices based on what fits with what we intend to do and what we believe the world needs most. So rather than develop vast array tests that will simply give people a ton of information back, most of which they don't understand, when we develop a test idea, when we want to measure something, it has to fit that profile of what difference can we make to it? What difference can you make to your health, to your well-being once you're empowered with this information? And how much faith, how much can you rely on that evidence that we've given you? What we will never do is just give you page after page after page of information on various markers, quantify amounts, tell you how much of one thing there is versus another. Because all of that is meaningless unless there is context, unless we can embed that in some way that enhances your understanding. That alone, I promise you, and please test this, compare us to anybody else. That one feature alone sets us apart and positions us right at the very front. We don't just give back the raw test data. We help you to understand that. We contextualize it, what it means for you. And always, most importantly, what it enables you to do better. Because that's the value of any test, is that you can live better by doing better based on what it is that you know now. But probably the biggest difference between being a leader in a field and somebody who's following through and just trying to do something well and trying to help where they can. The difference between the position we have right at the front is that it's explorative, that we are constantly trying to find what's new, what's better, and what's best. So we're looking at what matters not only now as to how people think and feel, but what's going to matter in the future. What are the best test technologies? How can we refine them? How can we make it so that each and every single person all over the world can have the same experience, the same sense of scientific feedback and engagement as if they were to actually visit the laboratory themselves? Because the key part is to make sure that the data collection is clean, is that we can standardize that, we can empower you with a method, with a piece of equipment that you can take a type of test, typically for us so far, without giving anything away, from a blood sample, a simple pinprick blood sample. And you send that off to the VITAS labs in Norway, who analyze that in their vast array of quite advanced technological kit. And we get that information back. And then our in-house team works on making a clear understanding of that and providing that context. So when we look forward, we're not just looking at what we can do, we're looking at what we can do next. What technique can we refine from the laboratory and empower you to be able to do that at home? And that's a big part of the difference for us. And when we look around at other people who are trying to function within this space, we see that we're clearly right at the very front of this, because our drive is always to make science simple. Never to lose any of the effectiveness of the science, never to compromise the standards of science, but to make it simple, make it reach people on their terms in their homes, so that the test they make at home, perhaps in their kitchen, by the time it reaches us, is still a good quality sample, an excellent sample that's good enough to be analyzed to those higher standards so that we can give you that information back. That alone consumes so much of our time, our resources, our intelligence, how we have to apply ourselves to innovating new ways of doing things. Because simply put, until we do them, until we figure them out, until we develop them, until we bring them to the forefront, they typically don't exist. And that's how you know you are leading when it comes to test-based nutrition. And then really we get to the more simple aspect, and that's understanding nutrition. Now in the 21st century, there is a heap of misinformation available to people. And the problem with that is people gain a lot of confidence about something that's actually inaccurate. And we spend a lot of our time demystifying this and bringing people back to good, clear understanding of what good nutrition is and also encouraging people to get real about their nutrition. This really romantic idea that somehow we could go back 100 years, that we could rewind the clock, and that everybody could source their food locally. Everybody would live on purely whole foods. That processed food and ultra-processed food, which is energy high and nutritionally low, just wouldn't be there for most people. That most people wouldn't consume fast food on a weekly basis. We can romanticize about this. And in fact, for a long time, as a registered nutritionist, I tried to bang that drum and tell people that what they needed to do was make whole stock changes to their diet, their behavior, so that it was whole food orientated. It's a romantic illusion. We have to get real. 100 years ago, there were approximately 2 billion people living on planet Earth. Now, as I speak to you today, there are 8 billion people. We have a bigger population and more limited resources, but we still function the same way as a species. If we go all the way back 6 million years, but as a modern Homo sapien, 160,000 years, we've evolved a certain way, and the essential nutrients remain essential. So we have to get real with ourselves. We have to look at how we function, how we form, how we think about food, the terms we have it on. And we have to get real about how we can get real nutrition, real vitamins, minerals into our diet on a daily basis, and not break ourselves with this best intention of doing that through a whole food diet. We will always encourage people to eat as best as they possibly can, but there are barriers to that. There are social barriers, there are economical barriers. There are actually nutritional barriers because it's difficult to quantify the nutritional value of food in the modern world. But we would still encourage everybody to consider their whole food bias and how much more of those leafy greens and those fresh fish they can get into their diet. But we also want to make sure that when we provide you with a product that contributes towards that dietary intake, it does so positively. And it does so, again, to the best possible standard. We make no compromise when it comes to our formulation. We make no compromises, and we don't apologize when it comes to the sourcing of the ingredients. We want top grade across the entire range all the time. When we develop products like a lean shake, we look at how food functions. We look at the glycemic response, the blood sugar response. We want something that replicates a real meal and isn't just packed with fake nutrients, but actually functions like food. When we look at balance oil is probably the single strongest supplemental product in the world in what it does and how it functions. With regards to the high phytonutrients, polyphenols, the source and the blend of those omega-3s, the fact that it has vitamin D in there, and this much every single day is going to change and maintain your status. It's this type of power that places us at the front. It's this type of process. It's this type of thinking that enables us to say we are leaders in this field. We never compromise. When we look left and right at what people are doing, it's purely to see what the rest of the game is up to. We stay focused on where it is we intend to be. We stay focused on what it is we intend to change. We stay focused on the evidence, the research, and how doing that well can change everybody's health for the better. And all we need to do is empower them with convenience. Simple things done daily that don't require them to whole stock change every aspect of their life overnight. Right from the start, the minute you start to take balance oil, the minute you start to engage and start to use the health protocol, you're making a positive difference to your health status. And we can measure that to the best possible standards. And where we are right now is still just the beginning. We know we're leaders because we know where we want to be. We know how far off that is, and we know exactly how we're going to get there.